So this is a video about the Fujifilm X-S10. I'm actually filming right now on the Fujifilm X-S10 because I want to show you guys some of the cool video capabilities on this camera. This is a $1,000 body, and Fuji have been upping their game over their last couple models, and I think they have something now that's actually really legitimate, mainly because of the size. I've got this on a gimbal right now. I want to move around. I want to get outside today because it's really nice outside. I don't want to be in the studio, but I want to show you a few things about this camera. I'm using the Fujinon 14mm f2.8 lens. It is in autofocus. And one of the things that I've been a little bit critical on with Fujifilm on some of their more recent cameras is that when you have a long track shot, or if you're doing a vlog and you change your lighting, you actually see the ISO start to step around. Well, we're going to move around today, go through some dark rooms, a variety of white balance issues, and you're going to notice that the transitioning on this camera is really smooth from one scene to the next, even when I'm in really bad lighting like in the kitchen. But I think Fujifilm have done an outstanding job with this. Everything is smoothed over. It seems to work really well. The other thing cool is the size. I want to get into the ergonomics on this camera because I think that's one of its high points. You have a small camera. I've got this on a gimbal right now, and it's not hard to carry. It doesn't feel like my arm's going to wear out because it's a tiny camera, and I think this actually increases the variety of situations that you could use this in, and I think it's a real big contender for video. 2020 has been kind of an interesting year for camera releases. We've seen a lot of models that kind of fall into this heading of what I would say are gateway cameras. In other words, they're not baseline entry-level cameras. They're not the cheapest. They're also not the most expensive. For example, we have the Nikon Z5, the Panasonic S5, I think even the Sony A7C. These all come in at a lower than flagship price point that might tempt somebody to get into trying the system. And I think that's what Fujifilm have gone for with the Fujifilm X-S10. We get a few of the best features from the X-T4 at a much cheaper price point. Also, the layout and the approach that Fujifilm has taken to the design is a lot more conventional. This is something that will be criticized by Fujifilm purists, and that we don't have the retro dials and knobs on a lot of the flagship cameras such as the X-T3, the X-T4. This is a PSAM dial, and it's a much different approach. However, I shoot manual mode a lot. Most of the buttons on this camera are customizable, and I think you're going to feel right at home with the system depending on how you shoot. But I've actually enjoyed it quite a bit, and I haven't felt it to be too foreign at all. In terms of image quality, there's not a lot of sacrifice that was made with the X-S10. We have the same X-Trans 4 sensor and X-Processor 4 that you see in the X-T4. Now, it is at a much lower price point, so there are a few sacrifices, but really on the surface, I think Fujifilm did a really good job of getting us a lot of bang for the buck. So for instance, with still shooting, burst rate speeds, you can go up to 30 frames a second. It is a crop just like it is on the X-T4. You're using the electronic shutter, but you can shoot super fast action. Now, on the flip side of that, I did find that in my personal experience with this, the buffer is really small, and you get maybe a second or two of shooting before it slows down and tries to catch up with itself. If you have RAW and JPEG turned on, it will see the biggest performance drop. If you have JPEG only, you will get more performance out of it. It just doesn't really stick at a true 30 frames a second for very long. Having said that, though, it's still nice to have it as a feature on there. You do have up to 8 frames a second with mechanical shutter, and even if you met it in the middle somewhere, you're still going to get a lot of performance out of a $1,000 camera. It's actually really impressive. There are two new features on the X-S10 that I think some people are probably going to find useful if you're not familiar with the Fujifilm system. So first of all, on the top left dial on the camera, by default this is set for your Fujifilm film simulation. So when you turn this, it's going to scroll through the film simulations. Well, while this is up, if you press the Q button on the top of the camera, it's going to go into a description mode, and it's going to explain what each one of them do. I think if you're not familiar with these film simulations, you're probably going to find this very useful. Another thing that is really cool is we have 3 auto modes essentially on this camera. You have your full auto mode, you have your SP or scene priority, and also a filter mode. Now typically, if you're going to give the camera to somebody else to shoot a family portrait or something like that, you'll throw it into auto mode. Before, on Fujifilm cameras, we always had this thing where it would only shoot JPEG in this mode. Well, if you wanted a RAW file, you were kind of out of luck. Now it will shoot RAW in all three of these auto modes. So let's talk about video on the X-S10. So this is an incredible feature, much like the X-T4. You're going to get the same picture quality that you have on the flagship camera. Now, there are a few limitations to this. I can get 4K recording up to 30 frames a second. It won't do 60p. However, there is a mode that you can switch into. It's HD only, so it'll work at 1080p, but you can get up to 240 frames per second. It does come at the expense of a slight crop and a slight quality and image drop, but it is better than nothing, and if you want overcranked footage, this is probably the way to go. It allows you to select the speed that you're going to be shooting at, so it's going to be either 120 frames a second or 240 frames a second. Then you select the speed that you want it to render at, so it's actually going to render slow motion without audio in camera. However, it does work with image stabilization as well as autofocus. Another sacrifice you've got on the X-S10 is recording time. So I'm recording in 4K. I do have a 30-minute limit on recording time. So this isn't a camera that you're going to be using for long-form content, but for vlogging or content creation for the internet, it actually works really well. You could easily use this as a B cam to an X-T4 or a more expensive camera just to get cutaways and B-roll. It really works well. And if you want to use it for vlogging, I think it's actually perfect. We get IAF and face detection in video. It locks on, the picture quality is great. We get the Eterna film profile. If you have a situation where you need more dynamic range, this camera will shoot F-Log. You get 8-bit 420 internal recording. If you want to use an external recorder, you can go HDMI out and you're going to get a full 10-bit 422 signal. So there's a lot of possibilities that you can have there as well. And speaking of the mic, as I mentioned, I have this sitting on a gimbal right now, and I'm just using the Rode Video Mic Go, or the little one, the $60 mic. This is a really lightweight and cool setup that really is easy to film with. So if you're interested in doing content on the go for YouTube or something like that, this really is a great camera. All in all, I've been very impressed with the Fujifilm X-S10. I think that Fujifilm are giving us a lot for the price point that it sits at without sacrificing too much. Of course, if you're going to need some of the power features like a consistently high frame rate or endless 4K 60p shooting, you're probably going to be needing to look at a different price point, in particular the X-T4, which is an incredible camera. However, I do think that this is a really good value for the money, especially for people who are content creators who need something small that they can carry on the go and just kind of do it. And that's what I've been doing in this video. I've just had this on a gimbal the whole time, and a lot of cameras get really heavy after a whole day of shooting, especially in the wind with having a bad hair day. But this one is done exceptionally well. Now, it does bring me to another point about the Fujifilm system. If you consider what we refer to typically as the double-digit XT cameras, so the X-T10, X-T20, X-T30, these are usually derived from a flagship model such as the X-T2, the X-T3, the X-T4. Well, there is no X-S1. So it makes me wonder, will there be eventually? Anyway, I would love to hear from you guys. I'll see you guys in the next video. Until then, later.